Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan side, April 14, 1909. An NYPD officer walks the East Tower Foot Patrol, a job no department in any other American city has needed to assign. A horse-drawn cart approaches the bridge from the Lower East Side. The two men in it are unloading toll booths. They are not city employees. They have a notarized deed in their pocket. The deed says they own the bridge. They paid $800 for it 3 days ago. They are not the first. They are not the last. Between the bridge's opening in 1883 and the morning a Manhattan court sentenced a Brooklyn conman named George C. Parker to life in Sing Sing, Parker sold the Brooklyn Bridge approximately 1,000 separate times. He also sold the Statue of Liberty, the Metropolitan Museum, Madison Square Garden. He sold Ulysses S. Grant's tomb to a delegation of Alabama Baptists who arrived the next morning to install a hymn board. Two questions decide the next 45 years. How does a Brooklyn-born grade school dropout sell the most famous bridge in the world 1,000 times without owning a single nail of it? And why did the NYPD maintain a permanent foot patrol on the East Tower of the Brooklyn Bridge for 23 years just to stop his buyers? The man who would sell the Brooklyn Bridge for the next 45 years was born in 1860, approximately 1 mile from where the bridge would eventually stand. George C. Parker, Brooklyn, second of 4 children of Irish immigrants from the post-famine wave of 1851. His father worked the docks. His mother took in washing. They lived in a tenement on Hicks Street. George Parker finished 4 years of grammar school. He did not, in 1872, continue. For the next 10 years, he worked the small fraud economy of late 19th century New York, patent medicine on Coney Island, shell games on the Brooklyn Ferry, fake mining bonds at Bowery saloons. He learned 3 things. A confidence operation could not be improvised. It had to be staged. The most reliable victim was not the rich man with experience. It was the new arrival with savings, and watching 3 of his partners go to prison in the same year, that the moment a victim could prove what he had paid for, the operation collapsed. The solution to all 3 was the same: paper. On May 24, 1883, the Brooklyn Bridge opened to the public. George Parker was 23 years old. He walked across the bridge on the second day it was open. He walked back to Brooklyn that evening. By the end of the week, he had drafted his first deed. In the winter of 1883, Parker rented a small ground-floor office at 38 Pearl Street, 3 blocks from the Castle Garden immigrant arrival point. Over the door, in painted gold lettering, New York City Department of Public Works, Bureau of Asset Disposition. There was no such bureau in the New York City government. Inside, a printing press, 3 official-looking city seals purchased without questions from a small stamp maker on Mott Street. A drawer of notarial signatures Parker had spent 6 months practicing. A file cabinet of approximately 300 forged documents, each prepared for a specific landmark. Behind the operation worked Parker's standing staff. A senior clerk in a green visor, who would emerge from the back room to corroborate any document Parker presented. A Tammany Hall liaison who would arrive, by apparent coincidence, at the moment the customer began to hesitate. A retired city engineer who would, when asked, swear on his late wife that the deed Parker was selling was the same one he had personally drawn up. They were not clerks. They were not liaisons. They were not engineers. They were 3 Irish-American actors Parker had hired in the spring of 1884 at $5 a day plus a percentage. Their previous credit, a touring production of the Octoroon that had closed after 11 performances. In the 44 years that followed, none of them ever broke character in the presence of a customer. From the customer's point of view, the operation was indistinguishable from a small bureau of the city government. By 1886, it was generating approximately $1,200 a month. In 1886, that was the income of a senior bank vice president. The customer was found almost always the same way. Every immigrant ship between 1883 and 1924 docked at Castle Garden or, after 1892, Ellis Island. Approximately 15,000 arrivals walked through processing each week. Parker maintained, on his Pearl Street books, a single line item entry every Wednesday: $10. Mr. D. Mr. D was a clerk at the Ellis Island cash deposit window. For $10 a week, he sent Parker every Tuesday evening a list of arrivals who had declared cash holdings over $500. The list, by 1895, ran to 40 names a week. Parker would meet the arrival on the second or third day at a hotel, a saloon, the reading room of the Astor Library, always by what looked like coincidence. He would introduce himself by one of his 7 aliases. He would explain that his family had owned the bridge, the museum, the tomb, whatever the target, for 2 generations. He would explain that recent city expenses had bankrupted him. He would explain that he was selling privately before the city took it, for whatever the buyer could pay. He would never name a price first. The customer, who could not believe his good fortune, would offer whatever he could afford. Parker, looking pained, would accept. He would take the customer to the Pearl Street office, where the 3 actors would corroborate the transaction. He would prepare the deed. He would notarize it. He would shake the customer's hand. He would walk the customer back to the hotel. He would tell the customer at the door that he would be unable to attend any handover the following day, owing to a personal matter requiring travel to Boston. By the time the customer reached the landmark the next morning with tools, Parker was already at his office preparing the next deed. The Brooklyn Bridge was Parker's bestseller, approximately 1,000 transactions over 45 years. Twice a week at the peak in the 1890s. Prices from $50 for an Italian widow with 3 children to $50,000 for a Hamburg textile heir. But it was not the most lucrative single sale. That distinction belongs to Madison Square Garden, sold in 1903 to a Hoboken brewer for $25,000. The brewer had been told the arena was being demolished to make way for a German beer garden. He arrived the next morning with 3 demolition contractors. 3 NYPD officers held him back from the entrance, while a 4th ran for a German interpreter. Grant's tomb was sold approximately 50 times between 1897 and 1926. Parker's approach was to identify himself as Ulysses S. Grant's grandson, carry a small photograph of himself next to the gravestone, and offer the tomb at a price reflecting his urgent need to relocate to Europe. In the summer of 1907, the buyers were a delegation of Alabama Baptists in town for the Northern Baptist Convention. They arrived at the tomb the following morning with a hymn board, a brass plaque commemorating their congregation, and a freshly purchased pew bench. The hymn board, engraved at a Tuscaloosa carpenter's shop the previous month, read, "In memory of General Grant, from the Saints of Tuscaloosa." The NYPD officer on duty turned them away. The Baptists left the hymn board on the steps. By the following morning, it was gone. What happened to it has never been determined. The Statue of Liberty was sold approximately 100 times. Parker's pitch, by 1908, was that the statue was being relocated to Cuba and he had been authorized to sell the pedestal as scrap. Trinity Church, 12 times. The Metropolitan Museum, 8. The Astor Library, 15. Across 45 years and 2,000 transactions, Parker generated between $1 and $3 million, between $50 and $100 million in current value. He never owned real estate worth more than the rental on his Pearl Street office. The NYPD's response to Parker, in retrospect, looks bewildered. The first complaint reached a precinct in 1888, a second in 1891, a third in 1894. By 1900, the department was receiving approximately 1 fraud complaint per month directly related to Parker. It did not arrest him for any of them. The victims, almost without exception, did not file formal complaints. They were immigrants. They did not speak English. They were, in many cases, in the country without complete documentation. Walking into a New York precinct in 1900 to report a fraud was more frightening for the average immigrant than the loss of the money. By a 1932 Brooklyn Bar Association study, fewer than 3% of Parker's victims appear to have filed. The remaining 97% disappeared into the city. Parker's Confederates were positioned to corroborate any deed. When a victim did walk into a precinct, the desk officer's first call was usually to the Department of Public Works. Parker's people, by 1895, had bribed 2 clerks inside the real department to confirm, for the duration of any single phone call, that the office in question was real. One Manhattan detective, in his resignation letter to the NYPD in 1907, described his last 11 years on the case as the professional pursuit of a man whose office I have walked past more than 700 times. He resigned without making the arrest. In June 1911, the NYPD attempted what would later be referred to as the Pearl Street Operation, a coordinated raid intended to seize the office and arrest Parker mid-transaction. 12 officers in plain clothes converged on the address at 9:40 in the morning. The office was empty. The printing press had been moved, the seals were gone, the wooden file cabinet had been emptied of every document. Parker had been tipped off approximately 6 hours earlier. The route was never determined. He reopened the office in the same room on a different door on the 11th of July. The NYPD's response, by 1909, was not to arrest Parker. It was to assign permanent foot patrols to the most sold landmarks: Brooklyn Bridge, Grant's Tomb, Madison Square Garden, the Statue of Liberty after 1912. The patrols were instructed to stop anyone arriving with tools. Parker, in his 1928 court testimony, called this the most expensive municipal compliment ever paid to a private citizen. Parker was, in fact, arrested 4 times. The first arrest came in 1908, 25 years into his career. The complainant was a Boston pharmaceutical heir who had purchased the Brooklyn Bridge for $800 and, unlike most of Parker's victims, had a lawyer. What happened between Parker's arrest at the office and his arrival at the Battery Precinct 17 blocks later is recorded in the arresting officer's report. During the walk, Parker attempted to sell the arresting officer the Brooklyn Bridge. He had offered it at $40 and the officer's silence. The officer declined. He filed the offer as an addendum to the original charge. Parker was sentenced to 1 year. He served 8 months. He returned to Pearl Street the same week he was released. He raised his prices 15%. The second arrest, 1916, ended in a 4-year sentence. Parker served 2 and escaped from Auburn State Prison through a tunnel that, according to the guard who later confessed, had been excavated by another prisoner who had taken a kitchen job because Mr. Parker had purchased him the position. The third arrest, 1923, resulted in a 6-year sentence at Sing Sing. Parker escaped during a routine transfer, walking out of a train car wearing what was described in the departmental review as items of clothing not originally his. He rode a regional rail line into Canada. He returned voluntarily 18 months later, having found Toronto, in his own description, too quiet for an Irishman of feeling. He resumed the operation immediately. By 1927, Parker was 67. The Pearl Street office had been operating for 44 years. 2 of his 3 original actors were dead. The third, by then in his 80s, was still arriving every morning in a green visor. 2 years earlier, the New York State Legislature had passed the Habitual Offender Act. The act required automatic life imprisonment for any 4th felony conviction. The 4th arrest came on April 16, 1928. A Manhattan assistant district attorney had spent the previous 14 months building the case. He had located 3 immigrant victims, now naturalized citizens with English fluency and lawyers. He had identified, by a former public works employee turned witness, the 2 clerks who had been corroborating Parker's calls for 20 years. The arrest team entered the Pearl Street office at 11:40 in the morning. Parker was at his desk. The third actor, the engineer in the green visor, now 83, was at the back counter. Parker was in the middle of preparing a deed. The customer across from him was a New Jersey schoolteacher who had inherited $11,000 and had decided to invest the entire sum in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She had not yet signed. When the officers identified themselves, Parker turned to her, apologized for the interruption, and told her the transaction would be completed within the week by a colleague at a different address. He then asked the arresting officer if he could finish writing the deed. The officer declined. The schoolteacher was not arrested. She received her $11,000 back in cash from the desk drawer. The trial opened in the Manhattan Court of General Sessions on December 11th. The courtroom held 320 people. The press section was full. The public gallery by the second day contained approximately 50 individuals whom court reporters identified as former victims, attending out of curiosity. Parker conducted his own defense. His opening statement, preserved in the trial transcript, was a single paragraph.
Your Honor, the prosecution will argue that I have, for 45 years, sold property that does not belong to me. I will not contest this point. I will simply ask the court to consider how much joy I have given to a city of strangers, how many stories I have furnished for the children of the people who paid me, and how many of the gentlemen in this room would prefer the New York of 1928 to a New York in which no man like me had ever lived.
The courtroom was, by the New York Times coverage the following morning, silent for approximately 7 seconds. The presiding judge sentenced George C. Parker on December 17, 1928, to life imprisonment at Sing Sing. Parker laughed. The transcript records the next exchange. The judge asked him, for the record, if he wished to make a final statement.
Your Honor, I would, but I have already sold the courtroom.
Parker served 8 years at Sing Sing. He was, by every account from prison staff who later spoke to journalists, the most popular prisoner in the institution. He was given the job of running the prison library. He spent his evenings instructing other prisoners, for free, on the elements of a properly constructed forged document. He told them, in a phrase the Sing Sing warden later quoted to a 1934 Saturday Evening Post profile, that the only honest thing a man can produce in this country is a confession. The Sing Sing chaplain, in a 1935 letter to a seminary classmate, wrote that Parker's classes were better attended than Sunday services. 24 of his known students went on, after release, to careers the New York Times would track in a 1948 retrospective across 9 American cities. Parker did not produce a confession. He maintained that everything he had done had been a public service. His logic, articulated in a 1932 interview with the New York Sun,
I have given more entertainment to the American people than any actor on Broadway. The Bridge was the cheapest theater in this country. For $500, a man could come from Hamburg to New York, buy the most famous bridge in the world, find out from the New York Police Department that he had been cheated, and have a story he could tell at his own wedding.
He died at Sing Sing on June 25, 1936, at the age of 76. The cause of death was congestive heart failure. He was reading, on his hospital cot, a Brooklyn Eagle article about himself published the previous Sunday. It was the 78th feature about him to have been published during his lifetime. The obituary that ran the following Tuesday contained one sentence that would be quoted in every subsequent account. The man who sold America's most famous bridge died as he lived, owing rent. His funeral was held in Brooklyn on June 28, 1936. Approximately 1,200 mourners. Among them, by the Brooklyn Eagle photographers' count, 4 Sing Sing guards in civilian dress, a delegation from the Tony Pastor Vaudeville Alumni Association, one elderly woman who had purchased the Brooklyn Bridge in 1894 and brought a small framed copy of her deed, and 6 men who had been Parker's victims and had paid for the burial expenses out of their own pockets. The journalist asked them why. One of the 6, an Italian-born tailor who had purchased the Statue of Liberty from Parker in 1911 for $200, said one sentence, "Because we are the only proof he ever existed." The Brooklyn Bridge, purchased an estimated 1,000 times in the previous half-century, remained, on the morning of his funeral, the property of the city of New York. The American English idiom, "If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you," first documented in print in 1908, 20 years before Parker's final conviction, has not, in the 90 years since his death, gone out of common use. It has, in the same 90 years, never been credibly traced to any other man.